This is Cole Butler with Cole Butler Therapy, and I'm here today to talk a little bit more about psychedelics and spirituality. So I've been using psychedelics on and off for more than a decade. I'm 28 now, and when I started using them, I was only 17 years old. 16 or 17 in fact. And they've been a critical part of my spiritual journey and my spiritual development. I'll say they are not the sole factor in my spiritual journey, but they're a major factor and inseparable from my spirituality and my experiences of connection with the divine and my worldviews as well. And because I've had these amazing life-changing experiences, and I've also had really difficult experiences, I'd like to share a very nuanced view of how psychedelics work and who they're good for and when to be cautious, but also encourage that they can have a very pivotal role in the development of individual spiritual practices in connection to self and something greater than oneself, and with that also an individual's journey towards optimal health, and that's in several dimensions. So your spiritual health, I like to talk about your mental health and your physical health, and the integration of all of those aspects of health can be fundamentally impacted by having a grounded sense of spirituality, and psychedelics can open the door to strong spiritual practice. They can also be very disconcerting for certain individuals under certain context, myself included, right? There's this notion that psychedelics are the cure, right? The magic pill, that they are what will save us from how bad things have gotten, both at the individual level and the collective level. But without the proper understanding, without the proper framework, without the proper support, they can be really disturbing. So before touting the benefits of psychedelics in terms of spiritual healing and self-progression, I'd also just bring up that element of caution. I live in Colorado, and so Colorado has legalized psilocybin, which, if you're not familiar, is the active component in mushrooms, magic mushrooms, or psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin is broken down in our bodies into something called psilocin, and this is what contributes to psychedelic experiences. Of course, there are other psychedelics that act similarly, such as LSD and DMT, which is the psychoactive component in ayahuasca, if you've heard of that. And then there are other agents, mescaline, which is the psychoactive component of peyote, the cactus plant used by indigenous peoples. And then additionally, you may have heard about MDMA or ketamine work, which are a little bit psychedelic adjacent. But being here in Colorado, where psilocybin is now legal, you can basically grow your own psilocybin. You can share it with others, so give it in the form of a gift. You can take it in the comfort of your own home. You can pay somebody to sit for you You cannot sell it without going through a whole regulated pathway. You cannot run a business facilitating psilocybin without going through a regulated pathway. But, excuse me, because it is now available, I believe people in Colorado are going to start having psychedelic experiences, right? Much more common. And so, as somebody who's been using these for over 10 years, has had a lot of experiences both on psilocybin as well as every other substance I named, I tend to give a word of caution to how you are using them. People talk about recreational experiences. I'm not against the idea of using psychedelics for consciousness exploration, or even if you want to have an experience of joy or a positive experience or a deep connecting experience. Probably my recommendation would be to keep it on the much lower end of the spectrum in terms of recreation, like a 0.5 gram or less, because it can turn into something totally different as you start to crank up that dosage, which could, in certain contexts, bring up maybe uncomfortable feelings, repressed traumas, certain fears, unintegrated aspects of self. And so, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, but just be mindful. If you're looking to take 3 to 5 grams, that's where things are going to heat up a lot, especially if you don't know how much actual psilocybin is contained in your mushrooms, right? The active component. So there's test kits that will kind of tell you how much, but just note that there are certain strains of mushrooms that have much higher psilocybin content relative to other kinds. So ideally, get a test kit. And there's a shop that's local to me called Orion's Apothecary here in Loveland, Colorado, which is just down the street from me, who sells like a simple at-home test kit for $25. I'm not sure if you can order it online, but I imagine so. And then there are several labs that will test your psilocybin. But as a general rule of thumb, like 1 gram or less, I would encourage for recreational experiences. 1 to 3 can be a sort of therapeutic dose or consciousness exploration dose. 3 to 5 still in that range, but definitely a heavier dose, intentional dose, healing dose. And then 5 and 5 plus grams of dried mushrooms is starting to get into like no longer about just healing, but more about deep consciousness exploration. Again, that totally also depends on how much psilocybin there is within the mushrooms. But in general, if you don't have any other reference point, that's kind of what I would go off of. Now, best scenario would be to have somebody who has special training and personal experience and experience sitting for others to oversee your psychedelic experience. Of course, a loved one or somebody that you're very close with, especially somebody who understands non-ordinary states of consciousness, can be a good option if you don't have access to somebody with more training. However, I would also be careful, about who your friends are, right? Like, are your friends experts in psychedelics, right? I've done training in this, I've done these for 10 years, and even I am like really cautious about sitting for other people's psychedelic experiences. And so somebody who has little experience but a lot of confidence, that might be a red flag. And just a general note about friendships is, how do you know who your real friends are? Like, is this friend really there for you, and do they really care about your genuine health and well-being, and do they want the best for you outside of what is best for them? And so if you have that kind of friend that you really, really know and trust and can rely on, of course, that's better. So in my own experiences, I've had two life-changing experiences on psychedelics. Both were on LSD. And then I've had one sort of terrifying high-dose psilocybin experience, which I'm still making sense of, which is why I offer, my word of caution. And then on top of that, I've had maybe 20 or 30 separate psychedelic experiences, MDMA experiences, just kind of exploratory, even recreational, psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, MDMA, one ayahuasca experience. So these LSD experiences that were life-changing absolutely were what I would classify as a religious experience, not only a spiritual experience or a mystical experience, which you will hear more about, but a full-blown religious experience. And what I mean by that is that all these different aspects of self that were previously disconnected can come together to form one coherent view. And that sort of happens all at once. And then there's this deep realization of this deep truth, because all of the groundwork of information has been laid for things to now come together and to snap, and for you to be like, oh my God, this is what I need to do. And so that's also backed up by some of the neuroscience. So essentially what happens under psychedelic experiences is that the default mode network, which is your normal talking self, like I am Cole, I'm wearing a red shirt, I like cars, and I'm a therapist, like that self sort of shuts down, like all the different brain regions that are associated with our sense of self, our internal monologue, and then all the other areas of the brain sort of light up. They have increased blood flow, and then they now also have cross communication. So if you think about it, your brain is not always activating at every different site all at once. That would be very overwhelming, right? There's a ton of information coming at us at any one given point in time. So we narrow down, we filter out unnecessary information, and that becomes our experience and our sense of self on a day-to-day basis. Well, if you can turn that off with psychedelics, and that's associated with the ego death you may hear about, loss of ego, and then all the other brain regions that aren't normally talking to one another can now talk to one another. And so you have a whole integrated experience of yourself. And so, that can support this notion of a religious experience, because now these different parts of self are able to communicate with one another. And so you may realize something that was previously inaccessible to you. And, I will also note with that a religious experience is definitely not guaranteed to happen. The two times that really happened for me, again, were just like a small subset of my total amount of psychedelic experience. Mystical experiences are pretty well defined in the research. Nowadays, it's this sense of unity, connection with the universe, the divine, God, whatever you're comfortable calling it, this sense of egolessness and oceanic boundlessness and connection to oneness, and the idea that we're all connected. And this is I would even say, relatively common experience in a controlled environment like the research trials that are being conducted, and is associated with a reduction in symptoms. So you see people's mental health disorders getting better when they have mystical experiences. And so, when you take that into account, right, like what we're really saying is, if we, can look past our sort of like, I'm a scientist perspective and say, oh, what's really happening here? Well, people are connecting with God and they're getting better. And so that's a very strange thing, and it flies in the face of how we normally think about the world, right? And so we have this idea that we live in a world that is materialistic, right? The way I've heard it framed is the Newtonian Cartesian paradigm, which is a lot of big words, but basically just means that it's this cause and effect reality, that the apple falls from the tree, and when I push on something it pushes back, and everything can be defined by like Newton's laws of physics, right? And Rene Descartes' work as well, which is essentially this world of what is out there is what we can see and what is easily quantifiable and measurable by science. And that viewpoint, taken to its extreme, fundamentally denies a greater spiritual reality. It basically claims that anything that is not seen or observable by the eyes or the methods of science and can sort of be quantified with data and verified, it doesn't exist, right? The notion of empiricism, we have to have a worldview that is formed by what we've been able to measure and know with the methods of science. Now, that worldview is what has allowed science to grow and has allowed us to make these assumptions that we can get rid of all the chaos, all the unnecessary stuff, and we can look at an independent variable, right? Like this one thing that we can tweak and measure while all of the other things are held stable and constant. So we can just look at like, how is this one thing changing? And many different fields of study have applied that framework to how they operate, and it's very easy, like in physics, not even in physics in this day and age, but in the past in physics, to think that way. And then the ego of psychiatry and psychology has grasped for this sort of scientific legitimacy that this empirical view offers, and we obviously have found tremendous value in like behaviorism and learning in terms of like B.F. Skinner's paradigms of learning, that you can reinforce a behavior and that you will then see more of that behavior, you can extinguish a behavior. Those discoveries, a little less than 100 years ago, were pretty monumental in how we think about the mind and human behavior, but in my view, we sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater, right? early psychiatrists and psychological thinkers like Carl Jung were viewing the world with a much more spiritual lens, right? Talking about the unconscious mind and synchronicity, so events that seem like they shouldn't be connected actually are connected. Strange things might happen in the world that are sort of unexplainable. Our dreams can influence our waking consciousness. Things like this were sort of the foundations of modern psychology, but when the behaviorists came along and said, well, look, we can apply the scientific thinking to psychology as well, it sort of paved the way for the field of psychology to feel, I would say, superior and like it could have this greater scientific sort of legitimate grasp that it was previously lacking, but other fields of study enjoyed. And I think that this was, appealing because it made people feel like they were serious scientists, right? Like they weren't, witchy people or hippies, but that they were real scientists doing real important work. So anything that did not fall within that purview of what is easily measurable was thrown out. And we adopted this paradigm that I think we still live in very much, which is the kind of cognitive behaviorist paradigm, specifically in psychology and how we treat people, which is that, you can reinforce or extinguish certain behaviors that you do or don't want, that are desirable or not desirable, in our current society. You can use these behavioral principles to add to or get rid of those. Additionally, cognitive behavioral therapy, the field of sort of cognitive science has this view. It's like literal cogs, right? The machine of the mind can be manipulated, right? So your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors are all connected, and so if something is amok, if you're experiencing mental dysfunction, it is the result essentially of maladaptive behaviors that are seen as outside of the norm in society, or thoughts that are leading to these bad behaviors. And if you chase that thought down to its core, then you change it, sort of just like unscrewing the top of the head and putting in a different little gear, then you'll have the desirable behavior. But I don't think the world works that way. And psychedelics throw a big monkey wrench in the cognitive behaviorist way of viewing the world, right? And so we're in this current mental health crisis where people are feeling very bad. And our solution, sort of at the psychological level, is let's tweak these thoughts, let's tweak these behaviors, let's tweak these feelings so they're more adaptive to society and to what is desirable within the context of society. Or through the psychiatric lens, you could say a certain medication can be applied, and it's the same kind of thinking there, that we need to take this pill to fix this bad neural pathway, this wiring under the hood that has gone wrong. And ultimately, while those treatments have been effective, and I think they've illuminated a lot about how our bodies work and how our brain works, they have left out a whole dimension, right? So to me, they should be subsumed under this greater paradigm of holistic living and spiritual well-being and health. And what the psychedelic research is showing us, I believe, is that there is something more fundamental that we are lacking. So, depression, other mental illnesses share a biological component, a behavioral component, a cognitive component for sure. But if we kind of zoom out to the macro level and we question the society and the world that we live in and the relationships that we inhabit and how we go to work and how we take care of our bodies, all of these other various systems, then we see that focusing really narrowly on the behaviors and how the brain is functioning is an incomplete worldview. I believe fundamentally that we have this inner healing intelligence, right? Our soul. And that the soul is sort of seated in the body, and that, the body is the vehicle that we inhabit in this incarnation, but the soul is the driver. And so when I experience poor mental health, it may feel like that is just, my body and my brain is not working right, and then therefore that is me and that is my soul. But like that's an over-identification of self with the body and the mind. So if you sort of separate out soul from body, you can say, hey, like, the body needs to be working well for the soul to be properly situated within it. And then yes, like if the body is experiencing dysfunction, then the self, right, will experience dysfunction, and then it's easy to over-identify with the body and the self. But I think psychedelics allow us to reconnect with that soul and with the core of our being, and recognize that the soul plays a big part in how the body functions optimally, which then encourages us to take better care of our bodies, right? So there are so many things on a day-to-day basis that we do that impact our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, choices that we make that may lead us to feel depressed or to be addicted to something. And so, we have a choice in terms of our true self, our true nature, to engage with those problematic things or to seek out something more than, better than, greater than. So when you think about this specifically with diet, we are in a massive crisis of health, obesity, cardiac dysfunction, diabetes, and with that, depression, anxiety, substance use disorders. And we are bombarded constantly with marketing messages of this is the way we're supposed to eat. These foods are normal. These drinks are normal. And those foods and drinks are killing us. And it's deeper than that, because it's not just an ad you see on TV. It's what is normalized in society as being okay. And so at any given point as I traverse throughout my day, I may be offered candy, or as I'm driving home, the temptation to stop for fast food, which contains God knows what, and what God does know, which is bad, and it's biologically designed to produce cravings, to exploit those systems and those mechanisms in our bodies that tell us to eat more of this stuff. So salt and fat sugar are all reward producing, right? They taste very good, and they trigger our bodies to say, let me eat more and more and more of that. And that is exploited by large corporations who, want to make a bunch of money, and they don't give a crap about your health, right? These are just greedy people who are very cut off from, their own souls and, their hearts and minds, and they're consumed by an ideology that is fundamentally immoral. And so, if you take a psychedelic and it's like, hey man, that's a bunch of junk, then you are not going to take in the junk anymore, and you're going to start to feel better, and you're going to start to question the system. But our current methods of treatment, our current ways of looking at mental dysfunction are going to say, hey, the system is right, you are what's wrong, right? Like, it assumes that the system of the society that we live in has it all figured out, and that, we're just a pawn in that system, and if we just do what the system tells us to do, then we'll get better. But clearly that's not working. And so, the fundamental truth here is that we all have agency over our own well-being. That doesn't make it any easier. The appeal of modern therapy, of modern medication, interventions, modern medicine. I mean, if you look at stuff like Ozempic, even in terms of weight loss, we're pulled in by this idea that psychologists and psychiatrists and doctors have it all figured out, and spoiler alert, we don't. Suffering is going to be fundamentally and inextricably a part of the human experience. And, we can't fix that by just going and seeing a provider and then they give you a thing and then you get better, if you are causing your own suffering unknowingly. So there's a certain amount of suffering that is going to be inherent to the human experience, and then there's a certain amount that is going to be self-inflicted. And so I think psychedelics don't take away the suffering that we experience. They just show us, what part of that is our own suffering, what part of that is how we are turned off and disconnected from ourselves and others, and then what can we do to reconnect to our core self and to take charge of our own health and well-being. And then those conclusions that come out of that then start to fly in the face of the system, right? They challenge the paradigm of the system. So if I'm being led to go to all these fast food restaurants and just fundamentally wreck my physical health, my spiritual health, and my mental health with this food that is terrible for me because all these companies are telling me that I should eat it and all these people are eating it and it looks very normal, I'm like, hey, actually that's a whole lot of junk and crap that I should not be eating, that like ruins my body. And and my body is the sacred vehicle for my soul and what allows me to have this experience of consciousness and beauty. Then I'm like, screw those restaurants, right? Like, I don't want to support that anymore. And then the restaurant is going to tumble, and then they're going to, their business is going to face an existential threat. And that's not so good if you work for the restaurant or you are the entity of that restaurant. And I'm not saying restaurants are bad, right? But huge corporations who exploit people solely to make profit are bad. I still go out to eat, like once a week-ish, and I try to pick, small local businesses that are making food that is still good for me and tastes good. But most of the time I'm watching my diet really close because I recognize how important good food is for my health, and that having dysfunction in my body is going to, hinder me from achieving my mission. Now, if we take this a step further and we look at the work world, I believe that we have to have meaning in our lives, and that our work should be meaningful and enjoyable and empowering to self. But so much of work as it exists in this day and age is also exploitative. And so work has lost its soul in a lot of ways. People in the work world have lost connection to their souls, in my view, and so they are interested in profiteering over having meaningful exchange and producing meaningful value. And so, I think many people are disillusioned by how work is an unmeaningful experience, right? If I am the sales guy at a corporation selling more of some product that doesn't really have much real world intrinsic value and is just to make the company I work for more money, and I don't have the time or energy to take care of my body or rest or nourish my spirit, and I'm just burnt out because that's all I'm doing and I'm making barely enough money to survive, I'm not gonna feel very good. And so I think that a lot of people are rejecting the way that work looks in the modern world. A lot of people are forced to take on one of these positions where a company or corporation already has built up the infrastructure to successfully profit and to grow. But for that corporation to exist, it again relies on people supporting that system. And so, I think people are waking up to the idea that this system is broken and the work is not meaningful, and they're just a product of this mass production machine, which is producing a lot of waste and is cut off from a fundamental soul level connection. So people leave these environments and then they're just kind of left with like, well, what do I do to make money? And then that's bad for the economy, right? Because people do need to work, but those people need to create meaning in the world, and they need to create value. And right now in the US, the dollar is losing its value, but you can't just print more money to try to create more value, because it's not the paper dollar bills or the bank account numbers that are meaningful. It is the value that is tied to those numbers. So the more value that is created, the more value that money holds, and when value does not match up to the amount of dollar bills and fluctuation, we have inflation, which is essentially the devaluation of currency. And I think we're in a crisis now in terms of the economy, where money has lost its value, is rapidly losing its value. Actually, inflation has eaten up the value of money by 20% in the past 5 years, especially due to COVID. And the fact that we printed a crap ton more money to try to fix that without producing more value, actually constraining a lot of the value that we're able to produce. And that's not to get political or make any arguments about COVID, because I'm just getting over COVID myself. But yeah, there's so many different systems that are in place in the Western society that can be kind of boiled down to elements of this mechanistic paradigm. And what the psychedelics do is they can be the catalyst for a spiritual experience which awakens the user to what is going on in the world around them and the reality of that, and the deep sense that we have lost connection with ourselves. And then once that new framework is realized and applied, you start to see how broken all the systems are. And then to make meaningful change, you have to basically do the opposite of what that system is telling you to do. And that can be very hard and very difficult and very scary, as I am now experiencing. But, my perception on that is that, like, what would you rather have? So would you rather have, being a contribution to a system that is broken and that is taking advantage of you? Or would you rather face the fear and the suffering that life has to offer to make a meaningful contribution to the world and to start to change the way that things operate outside of yourself and within yourself? Are you going to be an internal champion of the external change? And are you going to do the things that are required of you to make a meaningful change of that in the world? Or are you just going to be, a product of the system that wants to use you to continue to increase its profiteering and its greed? And I think, Friedrich Nietzsche fundamentally predicted the loss of God in society back in the late 19th century, and it's often championed as this triumphant thing, and that's not what it was. The full quote is something like, "God is dead and we have killed him." And he goes on to say that this is a bad thing and that this is a tragedy. And I think this godlessness that we're currently experiencing is sort of replaced or subsumed by scientism and modern psychology and different, political ideologies. I think people turn to money making as their new god, as their sort of greed above and beyond, what is required for one to exist and to live comfortably and to thrive. It then becomes, how do I collect as much as possible in this sort of game of money making, and how can I use the tools that we've developed to maximize that? And then you've got the people who figure that out and who move forward with that, and then the people who are products of it, because the person who's figured it out can pay them money so that they can just afford to live and survive. But I think we need to take the tools of business knowledge and apply that within a framework of godliness and connection to one another, because I think that we can create things that are really beautiful and meaningful and valuable by creating an economy of exchange of genuine, heartfelt, goods and services. So, for example, if somebody is really passionate about cacao, like if you don't know what cacao is, it's chocolate basically in its raw form. And, we see it everywhere in a sort of diluted, westernized way, filled with crap and sugar and in the form of hot chocolate, right, and Swiss Miss. But, the raw cacao can be, farmed and then taken in this ceremonial, intentional way and combined with like a little bit of local honey or maple syrup, cinnamon, cayenne pepper, these kinds of things, and ingested intentionally. And so, let's just say, for the purpose of example, that somebody is very passionate about cacao because of the way that it allows you to ground and connect with yourself and others. You can use the principles of business, right? Marketing and selling and accounting and legal to set up a cacao business. But then when that instead becomes about the connection to the divine and to others, and what that facilitates in a very intentional and ceremonial way, and starts to become the Swiss Miss or Nestle kind of model of how can we mass produce this and how can we sell it to maximize our profits, then you take what is the original sort of value and the golden nugget at the heart of that experience, and you steal it and you dilute it, and then you fill it with crap to make people addicted, and you mass produce it. And that is kind of the root dynamic of how Westerners have appropriated the spiritual and cultural powers of other nations and communities who did have a sense of godliness, who did have a sense of connection. There's this overarching principle of white people essentially, usually, actually pretty much always in my experience, rushing in, killing people a lot of the times, taking the thing of value, watering it down, extracting its value, mass producing it to make a lot of money. And that's a big problem. It's a big problem, and we need to stop. We need to get back to the heart of making things that are beautiful and are intentional and are valuable, instead of all being a product of a system. And we should be doing everything in our power every single day to move that reality forward. And I'm no stranger to the fear and the struggle that can produce. I live that every day right now, and I yearn for something more secure, for somebody else to say, hey, I care, and I have that godliness in me, and I want you to succeed, and I want you and your family to do well, and I'm willing to offer you this mutually beneficial exchange, so that we can both win and that we can lift each other up and create something great. But in my current experience, it's like that's not on offer, because our society is so deeply entrenched in its current paradigm that like the small genuine experience has been so lost. And so that's what I would hope for the world, is that people can get back to creating beautiful things and building meaningful experiences in the world with their true souls and their true heartfelt self, and that doesn't get watered down and commodified and extracted to support somebody's greed and the sort of game that they're playing. So I think I'll stop there, and if you actually watch this video to its completion, thank you very much for being a part of my rambling. If you found it insightful or have contributions, I invite you to leave a comment or to reach out to me directly to engage further with this topic. Let me know how you can support. And yeah, thank you very much.